Hi there. Welcome to Software for Technical Theater. At some point in time, we're going to need to spend time in AutoCAD managing the workspace because there are so many lines in most of our drawings that it's impossible for us to actually even see everything clearly. And the way that we turn things off and turn them back on so that we can see what we want to see when we want to see it and to make it look like what we want it to look like is with layers. So let's get started talking about that. We're going to need to manage the workspace pretty much all the time. So any somewhat complex drawing will require some layer management. Most of the things that we do are going to fall into this category, so we should just get used to it. One thing I want to point out is that AutoCAD Help is really, really helpful. Just Googling something and seeing what AutoCAD Help pops up, they're usually the first or second hit in Google. They're going to give you the full picture. This lecture is just going to talk about things in general. AutoCAD Help will talk about things in specifics. So go take a look at the links that I've given you. I'll put those in the description down below. And just, whenever you have an AutoCAD question, go look it up. It's helpful. So the first thing to think about with layers is that they control how things look. So the visual appearance both in your model space and on your paper space. They allow you to change the name of the layer, which is not a thing that's visible, but it's a way that you're going to sort things and be able to find them later. The color of the layer, line type, line weight, transparency, and then plot, whether or not you see it in the plotted version, so the plot layer. You also have a lot of those same options for viewports, but we're not going to talk about viewports today. That will be when we start talking about plating later in the semester. You can also use layers to control visibility. So this is the part where we're really managing the workspace, where you can turn things on or off. You can freeze or thaw. You can also lock a layer so that it's not editable accidentally or intentionally. And then you can also isolate or unisolate a layer. So let's talk about the difference between turning off and freezing layers. They're basically the same thing, visually the same thing, in that you take an object from being visible to not visible. But the difference is that turning off the layer leaves the layer in memory, which means that AutoCAD has to continue processing it. It also means that you could potentially select it, like if you do a select all or a select similar, that will be selected if it is in your turned off layers. And then if you delete those layers, if you delete the objects on that layer, you might accidentally delete something that you couldn't see. If you instead use freeze or freeze thaw, it hides the object, making it not visible to you, and it removes it from memory. So the program treats it like it doesn't exist at all. This is, in my opinion, far superior. For one thing, because a lot of times, if I'm having trouble visually parsing it, AutoCAD might also be having trouble processing it, which means that if I turn off that layer, AutoCAD doesn't have to process it anymore, thereby speeding up performance. This is oftentimes what will let you actually get something useful out of a venue drawing. It is, in my opinion, the only one that you should use. Just be in the habit of using freeze thaw instead of on off. Snowflake, not light bulb. Okay. You can also lock a layer which prevents the changes to that layer and then isolate. So freeze thaw better than on off, in my opinion. These are the layers are the primary method of organizing objects in a drawing by function or by purpose. So how you do that is going to vary from person to person. Everybody has their own style, and we all think ours is the best because it is. And you kind of will need to develop what works best for you. A few methods are as follows. You could do by unit and then by parts of a unit. So I might put all of the framing for a platform on a single layer, and then all of the lid for the platform on a different layer. You might also do by materials, by unit parts, and then by parts of units. So plywood, then platform framing, then plywood, platform, framing, lid, etc. You need some other functionality and tools to be able to do it that way. But that's my personal choice. That's what I usually use, by material, unit, parts, unit, etc. You can also use by purpose or location on stage. So for example, if you are looking at a ground plan and you have stuff that's part of the rigging system, then that might be on its own layer or on its own set of layers. Or you could have by purpose in the drawing. So an annotation layer, a working layer, guide layers, a bunch of stuff so that you can turn things on and off as necessary, or also control what they look like as necessary. It very much depends on what you're doing and how you use it. And if we're being honest, you typically have 2 or 3 different systems within your drawing, because I have a system for my annotation layers, as well as I have a system for my working layers, as well as the unit layers once I'm done working in them. So there's a whole lot of options, a whole lot of flexibility here. Some best practices that are going to be universal across whatever style you end up using. Number 1, use a descriptive name. Numbers and symbols are useful when you're sorting. It helps you put things in the order of priority, or things that you're going to use more often or less often. But it doesn't tell you anything about what's actually on the layer. And if you want someone else to be able to open your drawing and understand, that's going to be important. You also will not remember. Like if you just have a number that stands for a unit, you will not remember what that number means later. Put words on it. Put words. You should have words. It should be noted that you can also use non-alphanumeric characters. Those can be really helpful because some of them will sort above layer 0 and some of them will sort below layer 0. So you can, like for example, I put a dash in front of all of my unit layers because that sorts above. So when I go to my layers, I know if I'm at 0, I scroll up to get to unit layers, and I scroll down to get to material layers. Nice, right? You should also be consistent with your naming conventions. If you decide that everything that has to do with rigging starts with the letter R, then every single time it starts with the letter R. Be consistent. And then finally, use layers to manage object properties. We'll talk about this more when we actually get into AutoCAD, but it's possible to change what one single line looks like. Maybe I want that one line to be blue instead of yellow. The problem is that you can start running into problems. Things don't behave the way you think they do. Maybe now you think that is part of a different layer. In general, unless you have a very, very specific reason and you know exactly what you're doing with it, leave the properties set to by layer so that all of the things on that layer change together. There are a few layers that AutoCAD makes that you need to be careful of. The first one is layer 0, and we have all been guilty of drawing on layer 0 at some point. Here's the thing. It's a special layer. You can't delete layer 0. And it also is kind of secretly tied to some other layers, which can cause problems further down if things go weird. Just be careful about drawing on layer 0. Can you? Yes, for the most of the time it doesn't have any negative impact, but it can if you aren't careful. So it's there. Try to ignore it. Go ahead and make yourself another layer to work on so that you aren't drawing on layer 0. The second layer that AutoCAD makes that you need to be careful of is the def points layer. This is to do with dimensioning. So when you create a dimension, there's these 2 little tiny 1 pixel dots that go wherever your dimension is pointing to the thing it's pointing to. If you draw on def points, thing 1, you're never going to see it on a plotted paper because it's a non-plotting layer. Whatever is on there will be invisible to print. So be careful with that. The other thing is that if you freeze layer 0, def points gets upset for whatever reason. So just assume don't do it. Never draw on def points. Don't mess with it. Don't change it. Don't move anything that's on it. Def points is dead to you. Don't draw on def points. Similarly, MD visible and MD hidden are created when you create view bases in 3D modeling. Nothing should go on here either, and you do want to be careful of it. You generally won't be able to delete it. You can change the properties of the layers. If you, let's say for example, that you want your hidden line to be a thinner line weight and be dashed. Great. MD hidden is where you do that. Otherwise, leave them alone. Unless you're specifically trying to change what the view base views look like. And again, to reiterate, everybody has a system that works really, really well for us individually. Just because the system works well for me and the way that my brain works and the way that my workflow is, doesn't mean that it's going to be the same for you. And the way to learn around that is to ask other people how they organize their drawings. You know, look at what the second and third years do on their drawings. Look at what Josh does on his drawings, what Jim does on his drawings. And then all of us are going to advocate for our own because they work really, really well for us. And that's why we use them, because they work well for us. It should be noted that sometimes commercial shops are going to have a system that they expect the entire team to use because they need anybody on in their drafting team to be able to open up a drawing and understand how it's organized. And if that's the case, then that's absolutely the system that you should use, even if you hate it. And we're also not today, or not until later, but we're going to look at organizational systems and venue drawings because they are their own special, complicated mess. So to reiterate, ask people how they do things, how they organize things, try something new, figure out what works for you, and then do the thing that's going to make you the fastest, because ultimately that's the thing that we care about the most. Okay. I'm going to have a separate video where we actually get into AutoCAD and walk through some stuff. If you have questions, of course, let me know. And see you in the next video. Bye.